You still hear that little buzz in the background about, of the fan. In Mumbai on June 9th yesterday, monsoon arrived and it was raining gloriously last evening into the night, but it's still warm today and humid today, so I have to run the fan. Sorry. So let's talk about what people are doing and what the impacts are. We mentioned mitigation and adaptation, so we will think about these things as actions, and not everybody can act, will act, has the ability to act, has the resources like finances to act, and so on. And culturally, some states in the same country can be very different than another state. Okay, so California is also thinking ahead because it is a highly vulnerable dry state which has had wildfires and heat waves and water problems and so on, droughts, etc. Some areas of California already have a system to recycle wastewater into tap water to increase water supply and manage sustainably the water resource they have a little bit too low with too many people. So here you have flooding solutions that Miami Beach is thinking about with mbrisingabove.com. So there are many companies which are helping towns and people and businesses to adapt to climate impacts, right? The things we have been mentioning about the effects of warming and rainfall being less or more, sea level rising, they're called climate impacts. From Florida to California, from polar bear habitats in the Arctic to coral reefs in Australia's Great Barrier Reef, climate change is affecting the entire regions. Okay, ultimately, you may want to know what's happening in your backyard, and many times your parents may say, oh, I haven't seen any change in my backyard, or they may be saying, oh my God, there are bad things happening in Africa and poor people are suffering, so you must do something. So everything depends on how individuals perceive change that they see or don't see, and what they want to do about it even when they see change, and so on. So you have to follow up on your own with your brothers, sisters, teachers, parents, grandpa, grandma, everybody. Okay, so in 2012 we were about so here, using wastewater, recycling it by treating it, making it cleaner and turning into tap water, let's say for gardening or for bathing and so on. Sometimes people have, concerns or hesitations of using wastewater converted back to usable water, not even for drinking. They won't even be able, comfortable enough to touch it or use it for bathing or for gardening or washing cars, whatever. So this is an adaptation where you are increasing wastewater production, let's say by population, and the decrease in water supply is because of climate change. Then you are managing the impacts that are already here, and you are also in some ways mitigating the impacts on groundwater recharge. If you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. We have surface water like rivers and lakes and so on, and you have groundwater which is deep inside, which is sometimes drilled into and extracted for use or irrigation and other uses. In 2012 we were about 2 degrees away from the critically dangerous rise of 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 2 degrees centigrade. But this is a number that you have to remember, and then later on think about yourself why this number was considered a safe or critically dangerous level of warming. Let's just keep it there for now. But since then we have had yearly record-breaking temperatures, and scientists are still figuring out the exact warming for the decade. I just showed you 23 and 24. We have now a number of some 0.2 degrees centigrade warming per decade. It sounds like a small number, but if you look at the global warming of 0.2 degrees centigrade and take the heat content, the energy that is required to do this, that's a massive number. How do you compare that? If you take all the electricity production in the entire world and see how much energy is required to produce 0.2 degrees C warming, it'll be many more times the entire world's energy production. Okay, so one thing is for certain, if emissions keep increasing, their effects can get much worse in terms of increasing temperatures, but humidity, extreme rainfall, floods, droughts, heat waves, cyclones, hurricanes, typhoons, sea level rise, and so on. However, it can work the other way too. There is talk of changing companies charging companies money. Let me read it again. However, it can work the other way too. There is talk of charging companies money if they release dangerous emissions. You make it a crime to emit and you will be penalized. Businesses won't want to pay a carbon tax. For each ton of carbon you're emitting, you have to pay a tax. So the hope is they would find another way to power their companies, rely on renewables, reduce the waste of energy, and reduce emissions. Some states have formed the United States Climate Alliance, pledging to still meet the Paris Agreement goals. So in your country, is there one central government? Are there many state governments? Is the central government saying the same thing about climate change and mitigation and adaptation as the state government? Or are the states saying different things? So in US, there are many states which do not want to take climate action to mitigate and adapt, whereas rich states like California or different kind of thinking in states like New York may create climate action on their own, or they form an alliance of different states like California, Oregon and Washington state together, say we will do something about climate on our own. We don't care what the central government says, or we don't worry about what Texas says. Okay, so they want to meet the Paris Agreement goals. What's the Paris Agreement? This is an agreement that was signed in 2015 by almost all of the countries, and they agreed that they will reduce their emissions and try to keep the global warming to this critical threshold of 3.6 degrees centigrade, 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit by 2100. Is that 100% guarantee? They say no. At least 67% guarantee that we will stay below this. That's the agreement. Is everybody following? Not necessarily, but some states within a country are doing on their own. California Governor Jerry Brown, who's not anymore the governor, even met with the president of China to discuss climate change. So it's a state in the United States, but he went out and met the president of another country saying, we, the state of California, want to work with you to reduce emissions, because China is one of the big emitters now. And on June 16, 2017, Hawaii, a group of islands surely affected by rising seas already and expected to get affected more and more, became the first state to sign greenhouse gas reductions into its state law. Okay? Remember what we said before, regulations can be made and passed and made clear such rules exist, but unless they are enforced and there is a consequence for not following the rules are not very useful. But hopefully Hawaii is enforcing the rules that it brought into action. It's a signal that our planet's dependence on fossil fuels can change, and for your sake, since you're young and the future is yours and you are the future, I hope the fossil fuel dependence will change, not just can change. Okay, so here is the United States, the states in the US Climate Alliance, here California, Oregon, Washington, and there are this is I think let's say Minnesota, and here is Maryland, I want to know. Maryland is up here. This is probably Virginia and some northeastern states and so on. And there are those who expressed support for the Paris Agreement up here and in the Midwest and so on and so forth. And states with no official view on climate change. This entire line here is not saying anything about climate change, and Florida, which is highly vulnerable to sea level rise and hurricanes and so on, and the Gulf states, which are very vulnerable to hurricanes and sea level rise, have not expressed any official view on climate change. So within a country, the central government, which sits here in Washington DC, sometimes says we want to do something, like the Republican president who may say, I don't believe in climate change, I'm not going to penalize the companies, and we're not going to worry about renewable energy and so on. Or a Democratic president may come along and say, oh my God, we are facing grave danger and we must do something, and pass the budget to improve vehicle efficiencies and install more renewable energies and so on and so forth. Okay, so we'll come back and continue a little bit more on how the renewable energies can have some advantages but can come with some worries or potentially negative effects, and why people may be scared of certain renewable energies. You may say nuclear energy is very safe and it's renewable, but people might say, wow, there have been nuclear accidents like the 3 Mile Island in the US, the Chernobyl accident in Russia, and the Fukushima disaster in Japan and so on, which scare the people, and they say you can have nuclear power but not in my backyard. In fact, because of the Fukushima accident in Japan, Germany decided that they don't want too many nuclear plants in their country, whereas France does a lot of nuclear production for its energy source. There are other issues that we will see. So nothing is free. There are always advantages and disadvantages. When we take decisions, we have to weigh the advantages versus the disadvantages and think about climate change and then make the right decision. Okay, we will come back and discuss more in the next podcast. Then see you.